Okay, so welcome back to Racial and Ethnic Minorities. This week, I won't say today, but this week, we are going to be talking about, and then you also should have read If Only He Hadn't Worn That Hoodie, Race Selective Perception. So that is what we're going to be talking about in this lecture video. Before we get started, though, I would like to talk to you about your final paper, your race body project, okay, your final paper. So feel free to pull up your syllabus. And if you need to pause this video, you can, so that you can pull up your syllabus so that we can go through this together. Once you put up your syllabus, you can press play and discuss. All right, so just go ahead and scroll down to about the 11th page where it says Race Body Project. Okay, Race Body Project. And basically how it starts, and that's why I put this example here, it kind of starts with this kind of story of my body. So I want you to kind of think about your body as a raced being. So I didn't want to talk about it in detail. I wanted to go over a couple of theories and concepts, different things that we've been talking about as it pertains to race, in order to prepare you for how I want you to talk about and how I want you to write this essay and how I want you to talk about your body as a raced being. So one of the things that we've discussed throughout this semester is that your body has these intersections, right? Your being is intersected with a racial identity, a class identity, a gender identity, a religious identity, a regional identity, an educational identity. You have all of these different identities that make up who you are. And so your body, one part of your identity is your race. So you are a raced body, right? And race, whether you are white or whether you are Black or whether you're Latinx, or whether you are Asian, Native American, mixed race, whatever your race is, that informs the way you behave. That informs the way you think, whether consciously or subconsciously. Your race, your racial identity informs the way you think, informs how you move about the world, which shows that you are a raced body. In addition to that, you are also a gendered body, you are a classed body, you have all of these other identities that make up your body. So I want you to look at this link, The Story of My Body by Judith Ortiz Kofer, as just an idea, right? You're not gonna write your paper exactly like this, so it's a guide, not a model, for how your paper will be. If I can find a previous paper that was written really well, because I've given this assignment before from a previous student, then I can upload that paper and that'll give you a better example of what I want your paper to look like. So if I can find one of those, then I will upload it. If I can't, then I won't. So what I want you to do is write a 5 to 7 page autobiography of your body. And I want you to situate the narrative within a social context. And I want you to use a framework that deals with the physical, political, and ideological borders of your body. So I want you to engage in a critical discussion that explores how you as a person and how your body is not just a strict biological given. It's not just a strictly biological framework, but it is something that is racially constructed. And it has a certain dynamism about it that makes it unique. Essentially, what I want you to do is tell me the story of your body as a raced being. How have your ideas changed? What were your ideas around race? How did race influence your life in the beginning of your life, as early as you can remember? And then tell me how these things begin to progress over time. How have your understandings of race, and then how have you acted out in a racially over time up to the point to where you are now? And I know some of you may be 19, 20, 21, 22. Some of you may even be older, maybe even in your 30s. But regardless of how much older or how much younger you are, I can even think when I was 19, 20, if I were to get, if I was assigned this type of work, I would definitely have 5 to 7 pages worth of information to talk about as it pertains to race, especially taking a class like this. Some people may say, some white students may say, well, I'm white, I haven't really engaged in race. That's a lot to talk about. That's enough to talk about, especially when we start going into whiteness. Because even though a person may not have experienced racism, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have not engaged in some type of racialized situation or racialized situations. And now that ideas around race and the nuances around race have now been uncovered for you, you can probably think back to conversations that you've had with your parents or conversations that you've had with your friends or things that you've seen in school to where you can say, oh, that was a racialized situation. Now, a racialized situation may not always be racism, but you can see how race plays a role in whatever is happening. It may not necessarily, if you're a white person, you may not necessarily say that, oh, I saw racism here, I saw racism there, I saw racism there. But you can just see how, where the significance of race plays a role. So maybe when you first got to college, you may not have understood the importance of a Black student union. You may have said, okay, that's cool, that's nice, but why can't we just have a student union? Because we're all students of UNF. And some white people may say that because they're just not knowledgeable of the importance of Black spaces. But that's one of the things that we've been talking about, and not just Black spaces, but culturally unique spaces for any racial group. And so now you, after taking this class, you may now be able to say you weren't racist or that wasn't a racist remark, but now you have a higher sensitivity to some type of racialized situation. So I want you to talk about how your racial ideas, how the way in which you moved before and now you move around the world as it pertains to race and your racial consciousness has developed over time. I want you to talk about the way race and racism has influenced your body in the past as well as in the present. Again, I don't want to just talk about white people, but typically when I get to see what I hear from my white students is that they'll say that they haven't seen it or they haven't experienced it. So that's why I'm using them as an example. And it's rare that I get from students of color that they have not experienced racism or they have not seen how race plays a role in their everyday lives. But I do have students who've told me that, students of color who've said, I've never really seen it because I've never paid attention to it or it hasn't been brought to my attention or something like that. So hopefully what this class is doing is broadening your perspective. And if you haven't experienced racism, that's great. Or if you feel like you haven't, that's great. But I imagine in your 18, 19, 20, 23 years of living, you've seen racialized situations, whether it be on TV, whether it be personally in your life, whether it be at school. If you think deep enough, I'm pretty sure you could think of times in your life where you can now look back on it using the concepts that we're talking about now. And you can say, oh, I see how race played a role in that. Oh, I see why I thought this way. And now I'm starting to understand based on this reading or based on this lecture or based on these concepts. I'm starting to see why that was important, why my parents did this, why my friend did that. So now you can start to see how race was more influential if you didn't before. So these are some of the questions you might want to entertain as you think about how your body as this race organism has changed over time. First of all, how did you understand your body as a race body? Whether you're a white person, a Black person, a Latinx person, an Asian person, Native American person, when you were growing up. So when you were growing up, how did you understand your body as a race body? If I were to give my example, if I were to write this paper, I would say that my parents even at a very young age, introduced me and helped me understand the importance of my race and the importance of being Black and being proud of my Blackness, being proud of my heritage. So I didn't experience racism until maybe later on in elementary school, but I understood that I was different. I didn't understand that there was a hierarchy in that difference, but I understood that I was different at a very early age. And then also going to church, going to a predominantly Black church. Black History Month was celebrated and all those types of things. So since at a very young age, I was aware of my Blackness, Black history, being an African American, that sort of thing. So that's what I would say, but everybody may not have that experience. So talk about what life was like and what your experiences were like as a race body back in that time, and then how has that changed over time. So you're going to talk, so you may engage that question. Explain your first racialized experience and how it changed the way you understood race in your life. And I won't bore you with my own, but I think that question is pretty self-explanatory. So the first time you really understood that there was this thing called race that existed, right? You may not have experienced racism, you may not have perpetuated racism, but it was the first time you kind of saw it and was like, oh, this person is treated differently, or oh, this happened here, but didn't happen here. And it may not have been in person, it might have been on TV or something like that. It could have been any situation. But the first time that it kind of clicked to you that you can remember that race plays a role in people's experiences. How has your assessment of your body as a race body changed over time and place? So once you begin to understand race, how did you start to look at yourself? Did you start to feel proud of who you were? Did race and racism or racialized experiences, did it make you not so proud of yourself? Did it make you want to change something about yourself, your hair, your skin, your clothing, the music that you listen to, the dances you would do? Did it make you attracted to different types of boys or different types of girls? Like, how did you change as your understanding of race began to change? At what point did you become aware of your race and racial features and how they may have been the same or different from the people around you? So if you are Asian, how did you realize that maybe your features that are specific to your race, or maybe cultural features, physical features, biological features, when did you start to realize that there was a difference? And it may not have always been a negative experience. It could have been a positive experience. If you're Latinx, same thing. If you're white, same thing, right? What factors shape that assessment? So what were the things that happened that made you say, oh, there are some clear differences between me and people of another race? And whether you grew up in a predominantly homogenous racial or a racially homogenous space, or whether you grew up in a very diverse space, whether it be residence or school or church or place of worship or anywhere, everyone has to some degree engaged with people of various racial groups. So what was that like? Whether it be if it was on TV, if it was at school or in organizations you may have been a part of, or maybe a place of worship that you may have attended, to some degree, you may have engaged or even just watched it. So what happened? What factors shaped that assessment? What sort of measures, if any, have you taken to change your racial features? So we talked about that. Have you ever tried to change your skin color or your hair or your body features? And what motivated you to make that decision? And what were the outcomes of your efforts? Were you happy if you ever tried to do that? If you ever tried to change the way you looked or change the way you behaved? Well, you can talk about looks, and then later on you can talk about behaviors. I don't think I've ever tried to change my look based on my race. I can't think of ever trying to do that. Actually I can, but I don't know if it was race as much as it was just the thing at the time. But there was a time where waves, I used to have hair. So there was a time where waves were very popular. And so guys really wanted to have waves. And in order to have the certain types of waves, you had to have good hair or have a certain kind of hair, typically not what people would call 4C hair or Negro hair. hair that's, nappy, curly. That hair may not get you the waves that you like. And girls tended to like guys with the nice wavy hair. So me and many guys in middle school and high school would do all this stuff to try to get our hair to get wavy and have this kind of slick look that maybe looked more Eurocentric, right? And I'm just now thinking about it, that could have been something that was influenced by race. Now, it was also influenced by culture and, the fact that I wanted girls to like me, so that's why I did it. But maybe subconsciously, that was this idea of maybe not accepting my own hair or my own hair texture. Who knows? So these are the types of things I want you to kind of think through. Let's see. Oh, how did other social constructs like gender and class and education and religion, how did all these things connect to race to affect the way that you and other people viewed your body, right? So again, we've talked about intersectionality. It's not just about race, it's also about gender, it's also about class, it's also about sexuality. So in what ways have all of these things played a role in how you understand your body as a race body and in this assessment? And now, what is your current relationship with your race? The understanding of race changes over time, no matter if you're part of a so-called minority group or a so-called majority group. How we understand race and racism and racialized situations, you'll be developing that until right before you pass away, more than likely, right? So it's an ongoing process. So where are you currently, right? After taking this class, or while you're taking this class, or while you may be taking other classes at UNF, what are you starting to see, and how are you experiencing and understanding race now, and how has that been similar to the past, and how has it changed from the past, and how you have begun to engage in race? Okay, so you don't have to answer all those questions, but those are just some of the questions that can kind of get you thinking and writing your paper. Now this part is very, very, very important. In fact, this part is the most important part of the paper. You can answer all of those questions and give me a great, view, a great, deep look into your personal life, and I would be very interested, and I would read it, and I would be excited about reading it. And yeah, it would be great, but you would not get that great of a grade. It would be interesting, but you may not get the grade that you want if you don't do this next part. So the next part says, while you are thinking and showing me your life and kind of writing your racialized biography, I want you to integrate 8 to 10 relevant readings to extend your personal discussion and discuss these readings in detail. That means you are expected to make connections between your story and the content that we are encountering in our text and class discussions. So I don't want to just read just about you the entire 5 to 7 pages, and it can be even a little bit more. I don't want it to be like 15 pages, but if you get excited, you can write more. I wouldn't write less though. But I want you to also tell me, okay, this happened to you, or these are the things that you experienced at this age. How does this relate to systemic racism? How does this relate to intersectionality? How does this relate to colorblind racism? How does this relate to linguistic terrorism? How does this relate to racial formation theory? How does this relate to, how has this extended your sociological imagination? How does this relate to critical race theory? I mean, there's so many things that we've discussed, so many things that we've talked. How does this relate to social class? How does this relate to educational disparities? I mean, we have talked about so much in this class. So, and we're only halfway through the semester. So we're gonna talk about, we talked about Asian American sexual politics. So how does this relate to that, to yellow fever? The myth of the model minority. Well, I think we're going to talk about that later. I don't think we've talked about that yet. But How does this relate to, what was the other thing we just talked about, the other thing and concept, the white racial frame, the gendering of the white racial frame, all of these concepts. You have so many to choose from. Pick a few and tell me where you see these concepts happening in your life. How can you say, that was the gendering of the white racial frame right there. Oh, that's where somebody accused me of being a model minority. Oh, that was linguistic terrorism. Oh, that was the Latino threat in my life, right? So I want you to make connections. Bring in some quotes, not super long quotes, but maybe a line or two, a quote from the readings or something, to let me know that you're integrating these thoughts from the things that we're discussing, and cite them, right? Show me that you know how to take research and apply it to your everyday life. And the better you do that, the more seamlessly I can see where your life has this beautiful connection with the readings, has this beautiful connection with the research, the better your grade is. If I'm not convinced that it's not done well, and you're not really thinking through, not just taking little pieces. Sometimes I see that in y'all assignments. I'm like, oh, this isn't done that well. This is not a lot of depth of thought. It's very surface, which I've seen in a lot of y'all's assignments. I just can't see a real like deep conversation. There's some papers that I've read that have, I can tell you're thinking deeply about this thing. And so that's what I want you to do with this paper. And if I can't tell that you're thinking very deeply, then you'll get an average grade. But if you're really bringing out new ideas and really grappling with this work, really talking about it, even bringing out new ideas and new perspectives from the research, from the readings, even from your own research, even if you're going to readings that are outside of this, if I can see where you're really doing that, then I would be more impressed, and then you'll get a higher grade. So it's just a matter of how you're grappling with this work. And I can tell sometimes when the ideas are more surface, when they're deep. Feel free to integrate readings outside of the class, but make sure you're getting them from solid sources like maybe Google Scholar or some other JSTOR, some other scholastic apparatuses, mediums. When you write the autobiography of your body, I want you to pull in these references. And when you create a richer, a deeper paper, you will start to see how the personal and the research, how it transcends to say something beyond yourself. And then you start to see where your life fits into the larger society. And you see how your experiences are connected to so many other people's experiences, okay? The readings, class concepts, and lectures must be used to support and sociologically explain the story of your body as a racial construct. There's a reason why that is in bold. The reason why that is in bold is because that's important. If you're not doing this, if you're not doing it well, and if you're not doing it at a deep level, then your grade is going to suffer. The readings must be cited in text citation in your paper and included in your reference page. If you don't do that, then points will be taken off. And then here are all of the details. The paper should be double spaced, 12-point font, Times New Roman. Only books and scholarly articles, not Wikipedia. Please use proper citations. You can see how you cite and get an idea of how you cite from this example. And then also make sure you go to this link. You can copy and paste it to see further examples of how you cite in ASA format. ASA format. That's the format that I want you to use. So that is it. I hope that you are excited about writing the paper, because I'm excited about reading it. It's one of my favorite papers to read from my students. So I look forward to reading it and look forward to giving responses, and always get very interesting stories from my students. It just lets me know that there is a need for this type of critical analysis. There's a need for this type of dialogue. So yes, if you have any questions about your paper, please email me, inbox me. If you have any questions, come to my office hours if you have any questions. and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you as we get closer and you start to really put this together. Let me know if you want me to read over your paper, I can, and give you feedback. To send me your paper and want feedback, because I'll tell you I'll have your paper, but then I'll also tell you I can't promise you that I'm going to read this and be able to give you the feedback that you're looking for. But if you do it, maybe like, if you give me like a couple days turnaround, or maybe like a week turnaround, something like that, maybe like a week to 2 weeks turnaround, then I might be able to pull that off. Also, if 15 students email me the week or two before it's due and want 15 responses, then it's less likely that I'll be able to do that. So what I would suggest is if you want that type of response from me, get it done as early as possible, and then send it to me as early as possible. And the likelihood of me being able to give you feedback and then return that is much higher. And I would say that anytime a student has done that, has written a paper, asked for feedback, I gave them feedback and they apply the feedback, it's almost a guaranteed A. Because it's pretty much me grading the paper twice. It's like you're doing you're doing a retake, you're allowed to do the paper again. So if I were you, I would take advantage of that. But it's up to you. All right, well, that is that. And now we are going right into the lecture. So this lecture is very important. And there's going to be a lot of history in this lecture. So if you like history, if you are in Africana Studies, which I also teach Africana Studies classes as well. So this piece kind of blends in the Africana Studies and the history and the sociology here. So if you like all that stuff, then you might like this lecture. But we're going to talk a lot about history, a lot about sociology, and also criminology. I don't know if any of you major in criminology or take classes in criminology, or you're interested in that. But if you are, then you would like this lecture. So what we're talking about is race, the criminal justice system, and crime. And at the very foundation of this kind of discourse is really what sits at the foundation of many forms of oppression, which is fear. A fear of another person having power, a fear of being oppressed, a fear of being eliminated, a fear of losing power. There are levels of fear that exist that become the impetus for multi-level modes of oppression and interlocking modes of oppression. And when that fear is systematized, then institutions and policies and traditions and the ignoring of tradition are now put in place to help instill and profit off of that fear. And so it's very important when we talk about race, institutions, and the Black body as a criminal element, it's extremely important that we start with fear. The fear of the Black body is where all of this begins. And before we get into that, I want you to watch this YouTube link. Very short, 3 to 4 minutes or so, where Ta-Nehisi Coates is talking about the Black body as a criminal element, the criminal justice system, and mass incarceration. So I want you to watch it and then come back, and then we're going to do a kind of historical look at how we got to this point. Okay. All right. So when we talk about this fear of the Black body, and we see how it has led to the system of mass incarceration. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. It's very important that we start from the beginning. And this fear, I would argue, doesn't necessarily start with slavery. There wasn't a strong fear of Black people, of African people, during this time because there was an entire system put in place to oppress them. Now, it did not necessarily mean that when Black people fought back, when they would, kill their so-called masters in their sleep or run away or, burn down the plantation or burn down homes or do things to resist and rebel against slavery, it didn't necessarily mean that it instilled a certain level of fear, but as a system, as a country, it wasn't a whole, it was very difficult, right? The system was still on their side, on the side of white people. However, once slavery was over and white people were granted citizenship and white people now had opportunities and Black people, slavery was over. Black people now had opportunities. Black people were now so-called free. Now they were no longer enslaved and some of them could get an education and get a job. They had skills and many of them were able to make more than many of their white counterparts because they didn't get paid as much. So they had more opportunities to work, and the more they worked, the more money they made. And they started businesses and they bought their own land and all these opportunities, and especially particularly in the South. And so what that did was that created a fear among white people, a fear of not so much Black people taking over or oppressing them or enslaving them or going to war with them and killing them. I don't know if it was as much as that, as much as there was a fear of Black success. There was a fear that if we give them too much freedom, if we give them too much room, they might take over. They could go from being enslaved to sharecroppers, to educators, to teachers, to business people, to CEOs and senators, and they could even be the president if we allow this to happen. So there's less of a fear of their life and more of a fear of losing power, right? Losing their social status, particularly in the South. And so when African Americans had the opportunity to vote, and they began to do that in the middle to the latter part of the 1960s, when there was an amendment passed that gave Black people the right to vote, this is when the Klan rose, right? And the Ku Klux Klan became popular. I think it was in Tennessee. The first wave of the Klan became popular in Tennessee. And the Klan and other predominantly white, what were they called? Vigilante efforts were organized around this time to instill fear and to intimidate Black people so that they would not vote, right? So they wouldn't vote, so they wouldn't gain power, so they would be afraid to get an education, so that they would be afraid to rise, or so that they would be afraid to better themselves. But particularly it was around voting. If there was a voting drive or if there was a church that was encouraging African Americans to vote, you would find the Klan come and they would burn crosses and they would do things to intimidate these people so that they would not vote, because they knew that voting was power. And if you were able to have an influence over who is in office, that person in office can pass policies that will help you, right? So this is when lynching, right, became a thing. This is when we started to see lynching, particularly from the lynching era is said to be from the 1880s to about the 1930s. And it was during this time that you start to see this form of intimidation happening, where these white vigilante efforts, white vigilante organizations, Ku Klux Klan and the like, they would choose African Americans, Black people, particularly Black men, a lot of Black women though, but a lot of times you will see Black men. And for whatever reason, they would make up a reason. Sometimes there wouldn't even be a reason, but most times they would make up a reason to say, well, this person broke the law, this person violated, a rule that we have in this country or in this town or whatever. They violated a rule and now they have to be punished. And then they would grab these people and they would lynch them, right? And lynching, you've probably seen pictures or documentaries. They would hang them from a tree until they died and then set them on fire. And there were various forms of lynching, right? Typically, this was done to Black people, African Americans, sometimes Jewish people, every once in a while, few white people, but maybe like 90% was African Americans. And so this was done to, again, instill fear. Now, there is this myth that the reason why a lot of African Americans were lynched was because they were accused, particularly men, they were accused of raping or sexually assaulting or mistreating white women. And so oftentimes what you'll find is in documentaries or in historical narratives, they'll say, well, he was accused of misconduct towards a white woman. And so the white men felt that they had to protect white women by making sure that these men who were trying to push up on them or trying to rape them or sexually assault them were dealt with properly so that they did not oppress or mistreat white women. So that was the idea. And that you see actually that in a lot of scholarly research as well, particularly older scholarly research around lynching. But if we go back to Ida B. Wells, who was a phenomenal Black woman, one of the founders of the NAACP. She was a scholar, she was a researcher, she was a sociologist. With W.E.B. Du Bois helped found the NAACP. Her book, I think it was called The Red Book or The Red Scare, was a historical, she did historical statistics on lynching. She was from Mississippi, eventually moved to Memphis, and then eventually moved to Chicago. And she was one of the leaders of the anti-lynching movement during that time. And what she found, even in the early part of the 20th century, was that a majority of African Americans who were lynched were not lynched because they did rape a white woman or sexually assaulted a white woman, or even were accused of it. In many situations, many of them were not even in the place where the so-called interaction happened. So we know now that that was a myth. We know now that these people, many of these people were not accused, and even if they were accused, the likelihood of them actually doing it was very, 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 very small. And so lynching was not done to protect white women, but that was just used as a scapegoat, as a so-called justification for really enacting this fear of losing power. And two, so number one, enacting the fear of losing power. And number two, enacting this personal, individual, and structural control over Black bodies. And so it is from this time period, it is from these actions that you start to get this notion of the Black man as the criminal stereotype. Because generally what would happen is a person would be lynched, but before they were lynched, the crowd, the group, or sometimes they might have been even taken to court, and they were found guilty of some type of crime, particularly doing something negative, sexually assaulting a white woman. But it could have been stealing an apple. It could have been looking a white person in the eye. It was some type of infraction. And whether it was in the court of law or whether it was the court of public opinion, they were found guilty. Sometimes they were put in jail, then taken away and lynched, or sometimes they were just lynched on the spot. These types of things happen, but this is the foundation for the Black male criminalized stereotype, right? This leads us also into other forms of that, including the chain gang. Oh my goodness, so much. You got the chain gang, you got the penal system. So we can go on and on. We're not going to go into all of that right now. But if you were to take an Africana Studies class, we would absolutely delve deeper into that. But right now, I don't want to go off too much. So I'll just stay right there. But that is where you start to get the beginning of this idea of the Black man as the criminal stereotype. And then you start to see this evolution of the Black criminal. So before, the Black criminal could have been just any Black person, particularly a Black man, right? Any Black person. And they were seen as criminal just because of the color of their skin. And then over time, as you get closer to the civil rights movement and you start to see more and more resistance from Black men, particularly Black leaders, Black male leaders and Black women leaders, now you start to see that the Black male criminal is now becoming not just any Black man, but particularly the Black man that is causing ruckus, that is causing revolutions, that is initiating resistance, the one that is causing trouble, right? And so now, instead of looking at all Black men as a criminal, or in addition to looking at Black men as the criminal stereotype, now it is the one that is the leader that is influencing the rest of the community, the rest of the race, with these ideas around integration and empowerment and self-determination. And so we have to remember that it wasn't just the so-called criminals or lower class or people that were doing something wrong during that time, but Dr. King, like Ta-Nehisi Coates said in the video, at one point was considered one of the most dangerous men in the world. He was considered a criminal, where they actually, tapped his phones. They had pages and pages and pages of FBI reports on his everyday life. Same thing with Malcolm X. Same thing with Angela Davis, right? These were people, very educated people, very respected people, very spiritual people, who were still seen as a criminal element because they did not subscribe to the status quo. They did not subscribe to the racism and to the way and the normalcy of life as it was in the United States at that time. And so because of that, they were labeled criminals. So criminals aren't always somebody who actually does something wrong or even accused of doing something wrong. Sometimes a criminal is someone who goes against what is seen as normal. As we know, Malcolm X, after he converted to the Nation of Islam and he became a Muslim, we have no evidence of him actually committing an actual criminal act. Dr. King, same thing. We have no evidence of him actually committing a criminal act. Angela Davis, same thing. But these were people who were seen as dangerous because they did not subscribe to the status quo, because they did not take and accept what was said about them and how they and their people were being treated. So then after that time, so this is around the 1960s and 70s, then, and if you took my race, place, and inequality class, we talk about the influx of crack cocaine in predominantly Black areas, particularly predominantly Black urban areas. We also talked about mass incarceration and the creation of hip hop and all these other different things that have shaped Black masculinity. And so from there, we start to see how the criminal mind, the criminal description of the Black male moved from the revolutionary, from your Dr. Kings, your Malcolm X, your Angela Davises, to now the drug dealer, right? Because around the 1970s and the 1980s, this is when you start to see a big influx of drugs into the United States, but particularly into Black communities. And so from here, you see this, and then you see the removing of the Black men out of the communities. You see the removing of the Black middle class and Black professionals out of predominantly Black communities. And you start to see a divestment and underinvestment in predominantly Black urban communities. So because of that, you have high rates of unemployment, and many criminologists will tell you when unemployment rises, crime rises, regardless of the race. People don't have jobs, people can't take care of their family, they're gonna find a way to take care of their family, right? So then what do? Well, we want to have some type of economic system here. Let's flood these areas of unemployment and underemployment with drugs. Now they can take care of their families, but in a way that is illegal. And then that gives the larger society a reason to come in, take those people out of their communities, and create an entirely different system of economic, of high economic proportion, and use that to now help undergird or create a wealth building project for the privilege, for the racialized privilege, or for the racial privilege, for the class privilege, which we call the mass incarceration system. We call the prison industrial complex. And so now you have the evolution of the Black criminal from this so-called Black rapist in the early part of the 20th century to the revolutionary, to now the drug dealer in the 70s and 80s, to now these people who are considered to be violent criminals now, right? So this is the evolution of the Black criminal element. And so I just talked about this. So now we have in our current society what we call the new plantation, or what is called the new plantation, which is the prison industrial complex. In this new plantation, or looking at it as a different way of enslaving people of color, particularly Black people, enslaving them, which is why Michelle Alexander calls this book The New Jim Crow, because she's saying this is another way of reducing Black people to second-class citizenship. You can't enslave them. Jim Crow is supposed to be outlawed. So what do? Well, we take these people, we label them criminals, even if they're not, and then we put them into this system that makes them work for a quarter, a penny, a nickel. And they're literally making millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars. They're literally building highways, they're building buildings, they're building universities, they're constructing everything in the United States for quarters, for nickels, for pennies. And people are making billions. That's a whole industry that is built off of prison labor, which is a form of slave labor, right? So that's why it's called the prison industrial complex. And so the reason why, or how it is described, is you have all of these various interest groups, whether it be government, whether it be industry, policy, farming, that are all used to survey, to police, and to promote imprisonment as solutions to the economic, social, and political problems that lie in the United States. If there's a drug problem, what do? And we're getting ready to talk about this in a second. There's a drug problem in society, what do? Lock up the drug dealers. If there's a drug problem and this is in the 80s and in Black communities, there's a drug problem in Black communities, what do? We lock up those drug users. Why are they on drugs? They shouldn't be on drugs. They're bad, they're a criminal element in our society, lock them up. Who's giving them the drug? Drug dealers. Get them, let's lock them up, right? And so that is the way in which we deal with it. And that's why it's called the prison industrial complex, because now you create this whole industry that is used to help build wealth for the already privileged, small privileged group. So it is this expansive network of people and the parties that have a vested interest in mass incarceration. And understanding this prison industrial complex helps us uncover how all of these networks are used to fill up the prisons and to support this incarceration for their own interests. Soon, we will then begin to see how even schools and education, what you call those schools? Not private schools, but charter schools. You have banks. The same banks over certain charter schools are also the same banks that have a vested interest in prisons. And so because they have a vested interest in both, it makes sense to create a way for schools to function like prisons to prepare certain students who don't pass or who don't score a certain grade or are not of a certain academic standard, to prepare them subtly for the prison system. And then what happens? They get money on both ends. It's a win-win situation. Capitalism at its finest. That's what we call the school to prison pipeline, right? So these are the things that occur within the prison industrial complex. And if we look at the numbers, if we look at the statistics, approximately 2.3 million people are incarcerated in the United States. 4.5 million people are on probation or parole, which makes the United States the world's the country that has the world's highest incarceration. And you have other countries with a larger population. So the United States incarcerates more people than Russia, in China, who has 1 billion people. They have 1 billion people in China. I think the United States might have like some 100,000 or something, 300, 400,000. No, million, sorry, not thousand, million, something like that. But definitely, I would imagine less than half of China, and still incarcerates the most people in the world. That's a problem, right? The prison industrial complex has a network of private, not only prisons, but also, and we're gonna see in a second, we're gonna look at a chart where there is about how immigration detention centers have now been added to the prisons in terms of institutions that are used to help expand this prison industrial complex. They have become the default for imprisoning undocumented immigrants for a certain amount of time. So instead of putting them in traditional prisons, now they have immigrant detention centers for undocumented people in the United States. And so these immigration detention centers are now expanding what we call the new plantation, expanding the new Jim Crow, right? To not just affect Black people now, but now it is also affecting other people of color, particularly undocumented people, right? So if we look at this chart, we just kind of see the numbers. In 2000, the total prison population was 1,381,892. In 2016, the prison population was 1,505,400, which surprisingly, that's actually not that bad. Considering the jump, and you're getting ready to see it in a second, considering the jump from the 1970s to the 1980s, and from 1980 to like 1988, and then in the Bush and Clinton era, it was crazy, from like 88 to like 97. I mean, the percentage rate was like, probably like, definitely maybe over 100% in terms of its increase. This is only a 9% increase, which is actually not that bad. Still a lot of people. United States still incarcerates the most people, but has actually so-called gotten better. It's still not better, but the percentage in terms of people that are being incarcerated have actually decreased. And we're still at 1,500,000, which lets you know that what was done in the 1980s and 1990s is still affecting us today, and people are also still benefiting from it today. Total private prisons, though, have risen from 87,000 to 128,000, so more than 50%, or almost 50%. Federal private prisons have grown from 15,000 to 34,000, 120%. State private prisons from 71,000 to 94,000, 31%. But look at this private immigration detention. That's why we wanted to talk about this. This private immigration detention centers has risen from 4,841 in 2000 to 26,000. That's 442%. So now undocumented immigrants, undocumented people are the newer victims of the prison industrial complex. So that is something that we need to continue to look at and pay attention to, because that number is astronomical. 442%, growing immigration, private detention centers for undocumented people, right? So very, very important. So we're gonna stop, or we're gonna just take a quick break right there so we can talk a little bit about this class assignment that I want you to do, and then we'll go into the myth. We'll go into a little bit of the book, and then we'll talk about the myth of the model. We'll talk about the new Jim Crow. All right, so you have a class assignment, and for this assignment, you are required to watch the documentary below called 13th. Some of you may have seen it before, some of you may have not, but it's called 13th. I know it's very popular, so still, some of you may have seen it in high school or college, or may have done some kind of assignment with it. So while watching the documentary, I do want you to answer some specific questions. And those questions can be found under the class assignments tab that says 13th assignment. And as you're watching this documentary, I want you to find the answers to some of these questions, okay? And I want you to record the answers on a separate Microsoft Word document. And then once you have completed all the questions, I want you to upload your answers to the assignments tab that says 13th assignment. If you're still confused, please see the lecture video for this PowerPoint where I explain in more detail. So essentially what I want you to do, there's gonna be questions about this documentary. So I want you to watch it, and then as you're watching it, I want you to answer the questions. So they're gonna be in order. So you don't have to like skip around or anything. So they're gonna be in order, you're gonna watch it, you're going to answer those questions, and then you're going to upload that, and that is your class assignment. And a lot of it is just reinforcing the different things that we have been discussing, that we've been discussing for in this lecture, things that you've read. And so go ahead and do that. Now, documentary might be pretty long. So if I were you, even if you just want to do the assignment first before you continue, some people are saying, oh, it's a lot to listen to the lecture, do the readings, and do the assignment in those 5 days. Or, you know, by the time you get this on Sunday night, Monday morning, and for some people are, or not really some, just one person, are saying that it's been a lot to try to get this done. If I were you, then I would suggest for an assignment like this, where you don't have to know the reading to do it, just go ahead and do this first, right? I would highly suggest that you don't wait till Thursday to see this. So hopefully you're seeing this on Sunday night, Monday, maybe even Tuesday. Just go ahead and just, you know, take an hour or two while you're watching the documentary, do your assignment, and then upload that. You have another discussion assignment towards the end of the lecture. So go ahead and look at that on the PowerPoint, and you see your assignments on your modules. So just go ahead, and if you want to just do those first, get those out of the way, and then come back and, you know, watch and take notes on the lectures, you can do that, okay? But keep in mind that this is a 3 credit hour course. So because of that, at least 3 hours of the week, you need to be engaging with this material. You need to be reading, you need to be watching his lectures, and you need to be doing assignments. So it's just like if you were in class. So that's how the lectures are kind of laid out, as if, so you have about 2 to 3 hours worth of lectures a week. If we were in class, that's why you have 2 to 3 hours worth of lectures in these videos. So that's what I'm required to do. So just giving you all a heads up for those people who are finding it difficult to complete the assignments. If you're not, and you know you're good, then don't worry about it. If you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, and now we can move on. So moving on to what was talked about, some more of what was talked about in the book. I want you to watch this quick video link. It's like a clip from a movie. It's a comedy with Martin Lawrence, but there's something deep in there. Even though it's funny, it's something deep in there, that and a message that he's sending out. So I want you to click on that link. It's kind of a, you know, what they call a bootleg version. But if you can see it, definitely want to kind of spark your thoughts when it comes to this. All right, so what underlying message is being portrayed in this scene by the character of the police officer, right? So what kind of messages do you see? And what message is Montgomery trying to send with this, right? So with this training, Montgomery, which is the person, Martin Lawrence, the black guy who's shooting, he's playing this character, Montgomery, and he has to come into a place really quickly, boom. And he has to figure out who he's gonna shoot, who he's gonna kill. He has to make split-second decisions to find out who is the criminal and who's not. And so he does it, he completes the training, and then they ask him, okay, you shot this person, all these people, why didn't you shoot the black guy in the middle? And he says, well, why would I shoot him? He's a black guy surrounded by all these white people. Obviously, he's terrified. If I was a black guy surrounded by a lot of white people, I would be terrified, right? And it's a joke, right? It's a, he makes a little joke at the end or whatever. It's a comedy. But there's a little bit of sincerity. There's a little bit of honesty in there. Because it implies that any other officer, particularly any other white officer doing that training, probably would have saw him, the big black guy in the middle, and shot him first. He looks like the criminal, right? He's mean looking, he's big, he looks like the criminal. But the black guy, who understands what it's like to be a black guy surrounded by white people or in a certain situation, or probably have seen people that look like him but are not criminals, may look at that person and say, he doesn't look like a criminal to me. He may look like a criminal to society, but not to me. And so what that does is it causes us to think about this notion of stereotypes and selective vision. Let's turn to page 73 in essay 7. And what we see is this notion of implicit bias. All right. And if we look at what Rashawn Ray, who's a very prominent sociologist about criminal justice, what we see is this, or he talks about Trayvon Martin. And he talks about how Trayvon Martin is stereotyped for being this criminal, for someone who was not supposed to be in a certain space. His hoodie, right? The way he looks, he was tall, he was black, and he was walking in a neighborhood. And so there is this implicit bias that he has to be doing something wrong. Let me respond. And the response causes a tussle, and then it leads to the death of Trayvon Martin. And so, again, there is this implicit bias that exists in many people, particularly when it comes to race and crime. And the stereotype is that Black people, or particularly Black men, specifically ones of a certain stature, are said to be criminals or be up to no good, or have the likelihood of them committing a criminal act is stronger. That leads to this idea of stereotypes right here on page 73. And stereotypes at the bottom says that these are oversimplified sets of beliefs about members of a particular group. Anytime we have, and notice, I like how they say that it's oversimplified, meaning there are these ideas based on very little to no facts. It causes no critical analysis, no depth of understanding in any way, shape, or form, but based off of very simple observations, that we create a set of beliefs around not just one person, not just two people, but a whole group of people. That's what we call stereotypes. And that is what exists when we have a certain level of implicit bias about a group. And then when we have these stereotypes, this leads us to what we call selective perception. And selective perception means that after we've already labeled or placed stereotypes on a certain group of people, now when we see those people, we only see the behaviors that confirm the stereotypes. We don't see anything that refutes the stereotype. So we create the stereotype and then we have selective perception. So for George Zimmerman, there was a stereotype of a Black criminal. He said there had been break-ins already in the neighborhood. He probably had in his mind, these guys must be Black. So he already created a stereotype of a Black criminal and what they might look like. They're Black, scary looking, tall, big, probably wearing a hoodie. Already has that in his mind. So now when he sees Trayvon Martin, he doesn't see anything that refutes the stereotype. He doesn't see, oh, this is a kid who actually makes good grades in high school, which he did. This is a kid who has goals and dreams of becoming something successful. This kid does not sell drugs. This kid is not a gangster. There's nothing that refutes the stereotype, but instead, as soon as he sees them, he automatically sees all of the stereotypes that he's created in his head. Not to mention the fear, remember we talked about fear, of break-ins. So you mix fear and you mix that with stereotypes, you have a bad situation. I'm scared and I already think that you're gonna do something wrong, so I'm going to respond in an aggressive way. And the person that's being stereotyped against, the victim, may not have time to think all of this stuff through. All they're saying is this person is being assertive towards me. I need to protect myself. I don't know who you are. Now we have this tension. Unfortunately for Trayvon Martin, a situation that tension turned fatal. So let's go to page 76, essay and essay 7, where we again talk more about this notion of selective perception. So on page 76, in the first two paragraphs, first two and then even 3 paragraphs, Rashawn Ray is saying, a lot of people say, well, he shouldn't have been wearing that hoodie. You know, that hoodie, that's a very, clandestine type of clothing. Right? People who wear hoodies, we're not saying it's because he's Black. No, we're not talking about race. We're just talking about it was because of that hoodie. If he wouldn't have worn that hoodie, then George Zimmerman probably would not have thought that he had done something wrong, and he would have been okay. Obviously, that's stupid. But let's just say, just for argument's sake, let's just say, okay, let's not focus on the race part. I'll play the race card too much. You play the race card. Okay, we're not going to focus on the race card, or we're not going to focus on race. Let's just talk about the hoodie. We're going to use that and analyze that. He should not have worn a hoodie because hoodies promote a criminal element. Hoodies mean crime. People who wear hoodies are probably going to commit crimes. Well, if we use that approach, let's look at different people that wear hoodies. One approach to test this claim is to look at other social contexts where individuals wear hoodies to see if those individuals are perceived as suspicious or innocuous. One person who wears a hoodie frequently is Facebook founder CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg wears hoodies during casual encounters and even professional meetings. See examples, or you can Google Mark Zuckerberg in a hoodie, and you'll find many examples. That's what he likes to wear. And I have yet to see evidence of Zuckerberg before he was a billionaire or after he was a billionaire, where he was perceived as a criminal. Well, that's just one example. Okay. And we don't know. We haven't seen a whole lot of Zuckerberg. He's not on TV a lot. We don't know what he wears. Fine. Let's look at the example of New England Patriots head football coach, Bill Belichick. I don't watch a whole lot of football now, but when I did, Bill Belichick wore hoodies every game. Even if he was playing somewhere in the hot sun, even if he was playing in Miami, he wore a hoodie. And there's no evidence to show that Bill Belichick has ever been perceived as a criminal. The white guy that wears a hoodie. So this is just two of many examples of white people who wear hoodies that have never faced or would even think that they would be faced with the same fate as Trayvon Martin, which goes to show that number one, it's not just about the hoodie. So to try to explain away race would make absolutely no sense. And number two, selective perception is real. And the selective perception does not have to do with the article of clothing. Selective perception has to do with who is wearing the article of clothing. What group is wearing the article of clothing? And then we could break this down even further and talk about place, but I won't do that. I'll just stay right here. All right, this has been very long, so I hope you can break this up if you need to. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. If you have any questions, reach out, inbox me, email me, come into the office hours. Look forward to talking with you and hearing from you, and you will see me next week, and hopefully I'll see you in the office hours.